we just dealt with conditional statements in PHP, and as well necessary that we move into loops in PHP because they are very necessary. Often, when you write code, you want the same block of code to run over and over again a certain number of times. So instead of you having to actually print those or write the code, maybe print one, print two, print three, and so on, you want a particular script that is going to automate what you want to do, right? This is where loops come in. Loops are used to execute the same block of code again and again as long as a certain condition is true, right? So in PHP, there are various loops. There are various types of loops in PHP, and we have these four types. You have the while loop, which loops through a block of code as long as a specified condition is true, right? Now you have the do while loop, which loops through a block of code once and then repeats the loop as long as the specified condition is true. Now, what is different between these two? The do while will at least maybe execute a particular condition first before looping through based on the other condition. While for the while loop, it will make sure that those conditions are true. If not, it is not going to execute anything. You have the for loop, which loops through a block of code a specified number of times. So this is like the counting loop in PHP, the for loop. And you have the for each loop. It loops through a block of code for each element in an array. The for each is the most used loop when we are talking about arrays in PHP. All right, so we are going to actually dive into this and get to see a brief of each of them to see how they are used. So you have the while loop, like I said, while loops they loop through a block of code as long as a specified condition is true, right? So you have a syntax like this. You pass in the while statement, then the statement or the condition that you want. If the condition that is passed in these brackets are true, then this code will be executed, and if it is not true, then it will not be executed. So you have an example here. You have x equal to 1, and you say while x is less than or equal to 5, then we should print out the number is being x, right? So you are going to have an output like 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, and 5, right? And you notice that uh, after printing it out, you have to increment the value of x or decrement it or do whatever. You have to modify the value, because if you don't modify the value, you are going to get into what they call an infinite loop, and this is not a good thing. It might even drain your PC out, eat up all your RAM and so on. So you should be careful when using while loops because of the infinite loop. I'm actually going to do that so that you see what I'm talking about. So just to explain this code, you see that at this point x equal to 1 initializes the loop counter to 1, and we have the while statement which checks whether x is less than or equal to 5, right? So for each time it goes through this, we check if x is less than or equal to 5. So for the first time, it's going to be 1. Next time it's going to be 2, right up to the level where it will be 5. Now once it is 6, this loop will no longer be executed, right? And the x plus plus is an increment operator. I think we did this operators in PHP. Increment operators, you can either decrement, increment, or modify an operator and so on, right? Okay, so we are going to switch to our editor and we're going to do something like that. In this case, it's going to be 10, right? uh Let me clear this and come back to our code. So we initialize I, that's our looping variable, to 0, right? Then we say while I is less than or equal to 10, we should print out this is while loop number. Then we pass in the loop number, the variable number at this case. So you see that at the end we have incremented the value of I. We are going to run this for now, and then I'm going to tweak this code so that it actually does something else, right? So I'm going to php while.php and sorry, I'm not inside. Get into loops php while.php. Now notice what is printed, right? You have while loop number 0, while loop number 1, and so on. So imagine that you have actually had to write this like echo while loop number 0, echo while loop number 1, echo while loop number 2, and so on, right to 10. Imagine there were a thousand of them. That would be, that would not make sense, right? Yeah, that is how handy loops are in PHP. So you see that the while loop is important, but like I said, you have to be careful when using this. Imagine that I commented this out. I'm going to do this, and after that, I'm going to stop it because it might even freeze my machine, right? So I will run this, and I'm going to stop it. Look at something. If I keep on scrolling, you see the number of times this has been executed, right? Just to show you what I mean. You see, I mean, it kind of has no end. And if I kept this running, it will keep on running. And just like we said about variables, it's going to keep on eating some memory in our computer. That is why you should be careful when using while loops. So you always have to make sure that this looping variable is modified so that the condition should not be true over and over and over, right? That is the use of while loops in PHP. There are several cases where you encounter this. You will not only use while loops to print out numbers. No, there are really many other uses which you should go out there and check, right? This is just an overview. Our next loop is going to be the do while loop, right? Now, if you notice something, the while loop will only work if that condition is met, meaning that it will not even print out the zero, right? The do while loop, it loops through a block of code once, then repeats the loop as long as the specified condition is true, right? So it will first of all execute some code before checking the condition. So you have the syntax here, do, then a block of code, then the while comes in and passes in the condition, right? So the same thing will apply, right? I'm going to actually go into that and show you something. Okay, so we are going to do the same thing with a do while loop. Say do this block of code while this condition is met. So firstly, it is actually going to print out the while loop number and it's going to be 0, right? Before printing out this or before checking if I was less than or equal to 0. So explaining this code, it will first of all print do while loop number 1 or number 0, then it's going to increment this, so this will become 1 now. Then it will come out of this do and check if our 1 is less than 10. If it is less than 10, it will do this again and come out again and do the same thing, right? So the difference between the do while loop and the while loop is that the do while loop would at least perform some block of code or execute some block of code before actually checking for the condition. So clearing my terminal, let me clear this out and php do while php, and we have almost the same thing, right? So this one is what will be executed first. Then take for example that I was 1 and I run this. You see that I start from 1. We first of all do print this out, then increment I before checking this condition, right? That is the use of do while loop in PHP. Some of the times we usually kind of confuse between the do while and the while loop, right? Yes, so the next thing we are going to enter into for loops in PHP. This is like sometimes we call this a counter loop, right? So you have the for loops through a block of code at a specified number of times. So this one will be a specified number of times. In this case, we know the number of times that our code is supposed to run. Maybe if it was 20 times, then we're going to specify it within the for loop. But in a while loop, sometimes we might not really know the number of times. We just want to make sure that a particular condition is true, right? So for the for loop, you have this syntax. You have your initializer, your init counter, you have your test case, then you have your increment counter, which has to, it must not be increment, it could be a decrement, right? So you have an example here. We want to actually print out number 1 to 5, and we have this code. Now, just to explain what these parameters are for the for loop, the init counter is used to initialize the loop counter value, right? For example, you have x equal to 0. Now you have the test counter. This is evaluated for each loop iteration. If it evaluates to true, the loop continues. If it evaluates to false, the loop ends. So this is what will determine whether our loop should continue or not, right? Just as in while loop we said while x is less than or equal to 10, the same thing here. For x equal to 0, x less than or equal to 10, x plus plus. This is the increment operator, right? Okay, I think we should check out that here you have this, right? This is a for loop, and this initializes some value, sets it to 0, I, and sets it to 0, then checks if I is less than 10, and then increments the value of I. So for each of these, it's going to actually increment I in each of the cases till the case where I is no longer less than 10, right? So like we said, this is the counter loop. I'm going to execute this PHP for PHP, and you see that it does pretty same thing as the while loop, right? Yeah, like we said, there are loops. There are several types in PHP, and so if this was, for example, 1, you actually note that it starts from 1. So this is our initializer, the starting point. This is our test operator or test case. We check if this condition is met before we even do an operation. And then this x plus plus. Now, we could say maybe we set 10 here. Now we want to count in the reverse manner. So I'm going to put x minus minus, and I'm going to put x greater than 0, for example. So this would be the reverse, and if you notice, we start from 10 to 1, right? So actually this could be like a counter. Sometimes where can this be used actually? So you want to, some of you that celebrate the New Year's and so on, you write a program, and maybe how should I put this? It is 12, it is 11:50 or 11:59 and 60 seconds. So you actually want something to be printed out maybe 60, 59, and so on till when it reaches 0, and then something happens, right? So this is how useful this can be. That is not only the only case where it should be used. There are really other ways where for loop can be used. So this is the for loop in PHP, and this is how it is used. This is the syntax. And the next one we're going to go into is actually the loop that will be really some kind of very useful for you as a developer, since you always have to deal with data, and the data might be in form of an array, right? So the for loop works only on arrays. The for each, sorry, the for each loop works only on arrays. It is used to loop through each key value pairs in arrays. So you have your array, and it is yeah, arrays could be key value. Definitely, even if the keys are not set explicitly, they have keys. The keys could be their indexes, right? So you use the for each loop to loop through arrays in PHP, and this is the syntax, right? The for each, then you pass in the array name as value, for example. So if the array was people, you pass in for each people as person. So it will loop through each person in the array and do some work on it. You actually use this maybe in your assignment because you have to actually get data from a file and look through that data. Firstly, you have to convert the data to some array and then look through the data and check for some value and then do some operations and so on. You are going to use for each. That doesn't mean the other loops are not used, but most of the time you use the for each because it is simpler. Now you should take note of this syntax. It is static. It doesn't change. The for each, then array name as is as. Look, in Python you use for I in, but in PHP for each some array as value. So you have this example here for colors. We have our array of colors. Then we say for each colors, take note the colors is our variable name, our array, and then as value, or it could be color, you print out the color, right? So for each iteration, the value of the current array element is assigned to the value, and then the array pointer is moved by one until it reaches the last. So this is some kind of a while loop because after it is reached, after a condition is met, it increments the next, it moves to the next index. So it will move from red to green to blue to yellow in that manner, right? So let's actually get to see how this is used in PHP. So I have my array here, and the array is I'll call it people. There's no persons, right? For the people, and for each people as person, I'm going to actually uh, kind of extract the value. You know what implode is? I'm going to extract the value and print it out, right? So if I clear this out and execute this, you have PHP for each.php, and we have this. Let's see how we are going to do this. Let's try to echo some new line, right? So we have this. Okay, so you see that we have our array and we've extracted it, and for each of the array, you see this is printed up. Each of the items, right? Each of the person's property, the first name, the last name, and so on, right? Uh, well, if I did not want to actually kind of extract it, let me use a print arrow. Same thing, person. In this case, I'm going to execute this, and you actually see that we have the whole array printed out, the key and the value, right? I think there is a lot to this. You cannot only print out, you must not only print out the person, you can print out the person at a particular index, say first name, you can print in the age and so on. You could even do some if conditions and so on. So um let me clear this and rerun this. So you see now that we print just the first names, right? There's a lot that you can do to this. For example, check. I wanted to check if the name was, for example, the last name was Zuri. If the last name is Zuri, I should print out the age. For example, Zuri is not a person, is it? But it's just some condition. So I'll check if the person at the index name, the person last name, the person last name is equal to uh, sorry, then I'm going to print out. So I'll check the last name. If the last name is Zuri, I'm going to print out the last last name, and I will pass in the age. You are okay. So I will pass in. I'll greet the person. Hi, person and last name. You are. Then I'll pass in the age. Uh, yes. Oh, actually say uh, a. You're awesome. Right? Let's just do something here. So we check if the last name is Zuri. Then we print it out. Hi, Zuri. You are. What is the age here? The age is 25 and awesome, right? So I'm going to actually re-execute this and take note of what happens. You say, hi Zuri, you are 25 years and you are awesome, right? So there are a lot of things you can do within the for each, right? So you want to actually take note of this loop because you use it very often and it's necessary you understand it. So you this is the syntax for each, then you pass in the array name, then you pass in maybe each instance of the array names. If the array had multiple values, each of the values, then you can actually do your operations, right? Yeah, so I'm going to roll back. No, not going to roll back. So this is how the for each loop is used in PHP, right? A lot of other things you could do with it. I mean, just go out there and check how you can use these loops in PHP. Let me check something. There was something I left out. Okay, this is not here. So that is it about for each loop in PHP, and I think that brings us to the end of loop. Okay, we have this last thing. You have the break. The break is actually used to exit a loop for a particular condition, right? You want to loop through till a particular value is met, and once you meet that value, you should stop looping. That is where break is used. You have the continue, which skips a particular block, right? And continues to the next. So I am going to switch here and go back to maybe here and take note the break is used in any of the loops. In fact, break is used in conditions, in loops, and so on. So I'll say that if I'm actually going to use an if I is equal to 5, I should break, right? Means I should stop executing. Now let's try running this PHP do while.php. You see that it goes just till 4 and meets once it meets 5, it stops the code. Now what if we do not want to print out the feed block? That means we do not want to do while loop number 5. We use the continue, right? And if I will run this, uh, this just in a few seconds. Yeah, let's come back to this. I will do this while this. So do this. Put this out and actually use a better loop here. I don't want something that will cause a headache, right? So if I is equal to 5, I should break this loop and I'm going to execute this for the PHP. and you actually see, take note of something. Be a counter. You have 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. There is no 5, right? What happens? Because we say, okay, skip out and move to the next, right? There are cases where you actually use this a lot. If I switch this back to break, just to show you that break statement I use in everything, in every loop. If I use this, you see just from 10 to 6, right? Yeah, that is how our conditions and break statements are used. I'm going to duplicate it so that you just continue. Right? That is how loops are used and how to break out of a loop or how to skip a particular loop variable and so on. This is loop in PHP, and I think we have really done a lot, right? You can go out there and check out other things, how to do other stuffs, and yeah, just exploit loops. There are many resources out there. So the next thing we'll be moving into will be functions, and they are really very necessary. Thank you for